Also, in this era of American history, in the late 1800s, you started to see more literary movements that would rise or give rise to the idea of there being cultural and urban despair or otherwise cultural movements. You have various different works from people like Upton Sinclair um, who would discuss various different consumer issues and various different struggles in a consumer society. So you start to see the idea of there being more broad based American works. Europe at this time still dominated the literary movements, but around this time, America started to change that quite significantly. And one of the things that happened, you had an English scientist named Charles Darwin who spent quite a significant number of time observing animals, especially a significant number of time in the Galapagos Islands, which are off the coast of Ecuador in the Pacific Ocean. And he observed that various different animals had various different traits that seemed to have evolved. And he developed a theory called natural selection, and that some animals just seemed to survive better than others because they were able to adapt and have evolving attributes dependent upon the environment at the time. So, the idea that animals weren't just created by God, that they developed over time, was initially rejected by theologians and even most scientists and academics. But over time, it became one of these things that would be more broadly accepted. Nowadays, I think you see somewhat of a blend between spirituality and modern science. Uh, I personally believe that both can exist simultaneously. I believe that me personally, we do have a higher power, but I also believe in various different scientific truths. Okay, I think both can happen, and I'm surprised that more people don't believe in the same. But otherwise, though, um, what Darwinism somewhat exposed was the idea that people in cities were more likely to believe in scientific theory in and surrounding Darwinism, whereas folks out in your more rural areas still held on to more of their spiritual strength. Well, if you look at our modern politics, you still see that schism that cities vote certain ways, a more commercialized type of view, and rural areas have more of a true, just simple life is just about enjoying its quietness. So you have whole different ideas behind rural and urban environments, and one of the things that drew the biggest divide was Darwinism. Overall, though, the idea of education became very important, especially in cities. Um, you have a demand for more specialized skills and a demand for more education. Think about this. If you have a certain skill, you're going to be marketable. Um, do you think there's a need for people who can repair air conditioners in the summertime in Texas? Yeah. hmm There's a need for welders. There's a need for pipe fitters and plumbers. There's a need for um, auto collision repair. There are all kinds of things that are needed to where if you have a special skill, you are permanently employable. Okay. Well, that became something that had a mindset to advance various different thought processes. And it extended beyond just your technical type jobs, too. But the idea of education and public education really started to take root, especially at the college level. You see, it was around the 1860s, actually during the Civil War, that the U.S. federal government passed the Morrill Act of 1862 that established there to be government lands that would be offered to states for them to build colleges and universities that would advance agriculture and engineering. And certain federal dollars and research opportunities would be offered to these schools and given to these schools so as to advance agriculture and mechanics, as they called it at the time, engineering. So, with these schools that would have this emphasis in improving agriculture, you're going to have better foodstuffs. You're going to have more technology going into the way uh, our plants in agriculture is grown and processed. You're also going to have various different scientific and engineering feats that are now mandated by the state or government, if you will. They're going to have certain wills and certain services. Every state has at least one land grant institution. In the state of Texas, it's Texas A&M. Okay, so Texas A&M, its name in particular, began as the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Texas back in 1876. It was established under the Morrill Act of 1862. Okay, the A&M in Texas A&M stands for Agriculture and Mechanical. Agricultural and Mechanical. Okay. Now, every state has a school that's land grant school, an A&M school. It's just most other states changed their name. For example, Oklahoma State University used to be the Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical School. Okay? College, if you will. They changed their name in the 1960s to Oklahoma State University. Kansas State, same thing. LSU has actually A&M in their name if you go on their technical name. It's just Texas A&M didn't actually change their name over the years. They just formalized it to Texas A&M University. Okay? And they changed their moniker, or they've never changed their moniker, the Aggies. Okay? Oklahoma State, they used to be the Aggies. They changed it to Cowboys when they went from Oklahoma A&M to Oklahoma State. Same thing with Kansas State. Okay? Otherwise, though, it was schools like that and others like MIT that would specialize in STEM advancement, your science and technology advancement. And that's where you would take abstract knowledge that could be researched and applied for practical use. Okay? So many of our technological advances throughout this modern time had come from universities who have specific dollars set aside for research and advancement with engineering and otherwise. So that became much more widespread. And then, of course, you also have medical advances as well. You have the idea of pharmaceuticals now coming into play that could actually work with the human body to eliminate illnesses or otherwise. Remember, we talked earlier about bloodletting back in the old days. Nowadays, you start to see the advent of modern medicine being involved at this time. Blood transfusions, other pharmaceuticals that could kill illnesses and diseases and improve ways of life. You have the advent of modern healthcare systems begin around this time. Now, of course, it's very primitive and compared to what you see today, but otherwise, though, you start to see something good happen. Okay? So you have modern pharmaceutical research start to take hold, and the importance of understanding how infections are spread and how they're dealt and how to avoid, well, that became commonplace back then. Nowadays, you have the CDC, which is saying, hey, in the coronavirus era, we need to be social distancing, 6 feet apart, wear a mask, avoid doing certain things, and you'll help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Okay. Well, back then, there were more public knowledges and training about how to not spread infections and whatnot. And you had various different medications that came out. So these are some very, very big things that also came out around this era that changed our society. The advent and advancements in technology, science, engineering, understanding of how things work. You have the idea of pragmatism that comes out around this time. A theory of, okay, you have religions, you have thought, you have Darwinism, but no matter your theory, does it work? Does pragmatism, which really has its roots in the idea of does it work, that really changed American philosophy. Something to which, okay, um, it may be one thing for us to have a theory. Does it work? That's pragmatism. Okay, that also comes about in this era as well, especially as you have John Dewey, who advent the idea of a does it work mentality. There you go, the industrial era.